Hello guys and gals, it's me, Jeffrey again. Today we are getting back into the Creepypasta reading trend. And for the first Creepypasta reading of 2024 for the channel, I'm going to do a rather popular Creepypasta called Abandoned by Disney. And this is one of those pretty popular Disney-related creepypastas, but this kind of also has some interesting factors to things like Treasure Island or something like that. But I'm going to read this word for word, and then I'll do a short analysis of this after I finish reading. So, let's get to it. Some of you may have heard that the Disney Corporation is responsible for at least one real live ghost town. Disney bought the Treasure Island Resort in Baker's Bay in the Bahamas. It didn't start as a ghost town. Disney's cruise ships would actually stop at the resort and leave tourists to relax there in luxury. This is in fact true. Look it up. Disney blew $30 million on the place. Yes, $30 million. And then they abandoned it. Disney blamed the shallow waters, which would be too shallow for the ships to safely operate. And there was even blame cast on the workers, saying that they were from the Bahamas. They were too lazy to work on the regular schedule. That's where the factual nature of the story ends. But this isn't because of sand, and it was not because foreigners were lazy. Because both are just convenient excuses. No, I sincerely doubt those reasons were legitimate. Why I don't buy the official story. It's because of Mowgli's Palace. Near the beachside city of Emerald Island, North Carolina, Disney began constructing Mowgli's Palace in the late 1990s. The concept was a jungle-themed resort with a large, you guessed it, palace in the center of the thing. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the character of Mowgli, then you might better remember the story, The Jungle Book. If you haven't seen it anywhere, you know it as the Disney cartoon from the decades past. Mowgli is basically an abandoned child in the jungle, essentially raised by animals, and simultaneously threatened and pursued by other animals. Mowgli's Palace was a controversial undertaking from the start, where Disney bought up a ton of high-priced land for the project, and there was actually a scandal surrounding some of the purchases. The local government claimed eminent domain on people's homes, and then turned around, sold the properties to Disney. At one point, a house that had just been constructed was immediately condemned with little to no explanation. The land grabbed by the government was supposedly for some fictional highway project. Knowing full well what was going on, people started calling it the Mickey Mouse Highway. Then there was the concept art. A group of stuffed shirts from Disney Co. actually held a city meeting. They intended to tell everyone on how lucrative this project was for what it was going to be for everyone. When they showed the concept art, this gigantic Indian palace, surrounded by jungle staffed with men and women in loincloths and tribal gear, will suffice to say everyone flipped their shit. We're talking about a large Indian palace, jungle, and loincloths were not only the thing in the center relatively wealth area, but also a somewhat xenophobic area of the southern United States of America. It was a questionable mix at that point of history. One member of the crowd tried to storm the stage, but he was quickly subdued by security after he managed to break one of the presentation boards over his knee. Disney took that community and essentially broke it over its knee, as well as the houses were razed. The land was cleared, and there wasn't a damn thing that anyone could do or say about it. Local TV and newspapers were against the resort at the beginning, but some insane connection between Disney's media holdings and the local venues came into play, and their opinions turned on a dime. So anyway, Treasure Island, the Bahamas, Disney sunk those millions in and then split. The same thing happened with Mowgli's Palace. Construction was complete, visitors actually stayed over at the resorts. The surrounding communities were flooded with traffic and the usual annoyances associated with the influx of lost and errant tourists. And then it just stopped. Disney basically just shut it down and nobody knew what the hell to think of it. but they were pretty happy about it. Disney's loss was pretty hilarious and wonderful to a large group of folks who didn't want this in the first place. I honestly didn't give the place another thought since hearing it closed over a decade ago. I live maybe 4 hours from Emerald Isle, so basically I only heard of the rumblings and didn't experience of it any firsthand. And then I read this article from someone who had explored the island and posted a whole blog about all the crazy shit he found there. Stuff just like left behind, things smashed, defaced, probably ruined by the disgruntled former employees who had just lost their jobs. Hell, the locals from all around probably had hand in wrecking that place. People there felt just as angry about Treasure Island as folks here did about Mowgli's Palace. Plus, there was a rumor that Disney released the aquarium stock into the local waters where they had closed, including sharks. Who wouldn't want to take a few swings at some merchandise after that? Well, what I'm getting to is that this blog about Treasure Island has got me thinking. Even though many years have passed since its closing, I figured it might have been cool to do some urban exploration at Mowgli's Palace. Take some photos, write my experience, and then probably see if there was anything I could take home as a memento. I'm not going to say I wasted no time in getting there, but honestly, it took me another year after I found that Treasure Island article was just to get around going up to Emerald Isle. Over the course of the year, I did a lot of research on the Palace Resort, or rather, I tried to. Naturally, no official Disney site or resource made any mention of the place that had just been scrubbed clean. Even odder was that nobody, before myself, had apparently thought to blog about the place, nor even post a photo. None of the local television or newspaper sites had that one word about the place, though that was to be expected since they all swung Disney's way. They wouldn't be out there lauding their embarrassment, you know. Recently, I learned that the corporations can actually ask Google, for example, to remove links from search results, basically for no good reason. Looking back, it's probably not that nobody spoke of the resort, but rather that their words were made inaccessible. So in the end, I could barely find the place, and yet all I had to go was on a old as hell map that I have received in the mail back in the 1990s. It was a promotional item sent out to people who had recently been to Disney World, and I guess that since I've been there in the late 80s, that was just recent. I didn't really intend to hang on to it. It just got shoved in with my books and comic books from my childhood. Yet I only remembered it months into my research, and even though it took me another few weeks to locate the storage bins my parents had shoved it all into, well, I did find it. Locals were no help. At most were just transplants who had moved to the beach in recent years, or old residents who had just sneered at me and made rude gestures the same way I managed to say, "Where would I find Mowgli's?" The driver took me through an inordinately long corridor of overgrowth. Tropical plants that had run rampant and overpopulated the area, mixed with a narrative species of flora that actually belonged there and had tried to reclaim the territory. I was in awe when I reached the front gates of the resort. Tremendous, monolithic wooden gates whose supports to either side looked like they had either been cut from giant sequoias. Sorry if I butchered that, I don't know how to pronounce that plant. The gate itself has been gouged in several places by woodpeckers and eaten away at the base by burrowing insects. Hanging on the gate was a sheet of metal, some random scrap with hand-painted letters scrawled in black, "Abandoned by Disney." Clearly the handiwork was of some past local or even an employee who just wanted to make some small protest. The gates were open enough to walk through but not drive, so grabbing my digital camera and the map whose flip side showed the layout of the resort, I set off on foot. The inner grounds of the place were just as overgrown as the entryway. Palm trees stood unattended and ragged among piles of their own coconuts. Banana plants similarly stood in their own stinking bug-riddled refuse, and there was this sort of clash between order and chaos, as carefully planted rows of perennial flowers mixed with the obnoxious tall weeds and stinking blackie mushrooms. All that remained of any outdoor structure were broken, rotting wood and various charred bits of unidentifiable material, and what was most likely an info booth or an outdoor bar, which was simply just a pile of assorted debris chopped up by past vandalism and ravaged by weather. The most thing on the grounds was a statue of Baloo, the friendly bear from the Jungle Book, which stood in some sort of courtyard in front of the main building. He was frozen in a jovial wave towards no one, staring into empty space with a silly, toothy grin as bird crap covered whole swaths of his fur and vines and snared on the platform. I approached the main building, called the Palace, only to find the outside of the building had been covered in graffiti where the original paint hadn't peeled and chipped away. Front doors weren't just open, they had been taken off the hinges and just were completely stolen. Above the front doors, or the gaping maw where they had been, someone once again pinned "Abandoned by Disney." I wish I could tell you all about the awesome stuff I could see inside the palace. Forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, full-fledged secret society of homeless bums, but no. The inside of this building was so stark, so bare, so devoid that I actually think people had stolen the molding off the walls. Anything that was too big to steal, like counters, desks, giant fake trees, they were all just resting among this empty echo chamber that amplified my every step like a slow rat, a tat of a machine gun. Check the floor plan and head all the way to locations that might seem in any way interesting. The kitchen, as you would imagine, which was a industrial food preparation area with all the appliances and space, no expenses spared. With every glass surface was broken, every door knocked off the hinges, every metal surface kicked and dented. The entire place smelled like very old piss. Like the huge freezer was not even remotely cool now, had rows upon rows of empty shelf space. The hooks hung from the ceiling, probably for hanging cuts of steak, and as I stood inside for the moment, I noticed that they were swinging. Each hook swang in a different direction, but their movements were slow and small that it was almost impossible to see. I figured out it had be caused by my footsteps, so I stopped one from swinging and by clutching it in my fist, then carefully letting go, but then within seconds it just started swinging once more. The bathrooms were much the same state as the rest of the place, just like the Treasure Island Resort. Someone had methodically destroyed each porcelain commode with coconuts and other implements. There was also about half an inch of rancid, stinking, stagnant water on the floor, so I couldn't stay there very long. What was odd is the toilets and the sinks and the bidets in the bathrooms all dripped and leaked and just ran freely. It seemed that to me they should have been shut the water off long ago, meaning the water in the bathrooms was still running. There were plenty of rooms in the resort, but naturally I did not have time to look through them all. Although the few I did peer in were similarly wrecked, and I didn't expect to find anything there. I just thought there was just actually a television or a radio in one room, but I really think I heard quiet conversation coming out. Though it sounded like a whisper, or probably my own breathing echoing the silence, or it was just another case of the sound of flowing water playing tricks on the mind. But this is what it sounded. I didn't believe it. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Your father told you. And then there's, possibly just weeping. I know, that sounds ridiculous, but I'm just telling you what I experienced. Why I thought there might have been something running in that room, or worse, some vagrants who had holed up there and probably would have killed me with a knife or something. But at the front doors of the palace again, I figured I hadn't found anything of note and had wasted the trip up. As I looked out the door, I noticed something interesting in the courtyard that I apparently missed, and it was something that would have given me at least one thing to show for all my trouble, even if it was just a photo. There was a lifelike statue of a python, maybe 80 feet long, coiled up and sunning itself on a pedestal right in the center of the area. It was so almost time for the sun to start setting, so the light fell onto the object in the perfect way for a photo. When I approached the python and snapped the photo, then I stood on my toes and snapped another. I moved closer just to get a detail of its face. But then slowly, casually, the python lifted its head, looked directly into my eyes, turned, and slithered off the pedestal across the grass and into the trees. All 80 feet of it, its head long disappeared into the woods before its tail even left the sunning spot. Disney had released all their exotic animals onto the grounds. Right there on the floor plan map was the reptile house. I should have known. I read all about the sharks at Treasure Island, and I should have known they'd done this. I was dumbfounded but utterly stupefied. My mouth must have been hanging open for the longest time before I came back down to earth and snapped it shut. I blinked a few times and backed away from where the snake had been, back to the palace. Even though it was totally gone, I still wasn't taking any chances and backed my way into the building. It took a few deep breaths and slapped my own face to get myself right in the head after that. And then I looked for a place to sit down as my legs were feeling a bit like jelly at this point. And of course, there was no place to sit down unless I wanted to recline the broken glass and dead leaf carpet or haul myself onto a desk of questionable reliability. Although I had seen some stairs near the palace's lobby and decided to have a seat there until I felt better. The staircase was far enough away from the front of the building to be relatively clean, save for a startling accumulation of dust. I pulled a wedge of metal off the wall and once again painted with the abandoned by Disney motto I'd become accustomed to. I placed the wedge onto the stairs and set it on to keep at least somewhat clean. The stairway led downward below ground level. Using my camera flash with a sort of improvised flashlight, I could see that the staircase ended in a metal mesh door with a padlock. A sign on the door, a real sign, read, "Mascots only, thank you." This perked up my spirits a little bit for two reasons. One, a mascots only area would have been definitely had some interesting stuff back in the day. Two, the padlock was still in place. Nobody had gone there, not even the vandals, not the looters, nobody. This was like the only one place that I could actually explore and perhaps find something to photography or possibly steal. I had come to the palace essentially agreeing with myself that it was okay to take anything I wanted because, hey, it's abandoned. It didn't take much to bust down the lock. Well, actually that's wrong. It didn't take much to bust the metal plate on the wall that the padlock was hooked to at all, as time and decay had done most of the work for me and I was able to bend the metal plate enough to pull the screws out of the wall. Something nobody else had apparently thought of, or it hadn't been able to do at the time. The mascots only area was a startling and very welcome change from the rest of the building I had seen. For once, every second or third fluorescent light overhead was illuminated, even though they flickered and faded randomly, although nothing had been stolen or broken, as if age and exposure was defiantly taking their toll. Tables had notepads and pens. There were also clocks with punched-in clocks on the wall, complete with filled-out time cards. Chairs were scattered all around, and there were even a small break room with an old static-filled television and a long-drawn-out food and drink on the counters. It was like one of those post-apocalypse movies where everything was left in a state of evacuation. As I walked the maze-like sub-basement hallways of the mascots area, the sights just became more and more interesting. As I went further, desks and tables were knocked over, paper scattered and almost melted with the damp floor. And a large carpet of mold was slowly overtaking the real rotting crimson floor covering. Everything was just sort of, squishy, Anything would disintegrate into mush when I applied even the least amount of force in clothing items hanging on hooks in one of the rooms, simply to the threads if I was to unhook them. One thing that really annoyed me, though, was the light was becoming much more sparse and unreliable as I went further into the dark, suffocating depths of the place. And eventually, I reached the black and yellow door with the words, Character Prep 1 stenciled on it. The door wouldn't open at first. I figured this was probably where the costumes were kept, and I definitely wanted to take a photo of the twisted, stinking mess. But try to my whatever angle or trick I did, the door just would not budge. That's until I gave up and started to walk away, and that's when there was a slight popping sound, and the door creaked open slightly. Inside the room was completely dark, pitch black. I used the camera flash to look for the light switch at the wall to buy the door, but there was just nothing. As I made my search, I was jarred out for my sense of excitement by a loud electrical buzz. Rows of lights overhead suddenly flashed to life, flickering and fading in and out like the rest of the place that I passed. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, and it seemed like the light was going to keep getting brighter until all the bulbs exploded. But then I thought it would reach that critical stage. The lights just dimmed a bit and steadied. The room was exactly what I had pictured it. Various Disney costumes hung on the walls, fully put together like strange cartoon cadavers hung from invisible nooses. There was an entire rack of loincloths and native clothes on hangers towards the back. But what I found odd was that I wanted a photography right away was a Mickey Mouse costume at the center of the room. And unlike the other costumes, it was lying on its back in the center of the floor like in the crime scene. The fur on the costume was rotting and shedding, creating bare patches. And what was even odder was that the color of the costume, it was like a photo negative of the actual Mickey Mouse. Like colors inverted, like black where he should be white and white where he should be black, with his normal red overalls being light blue. The sight was off-putting enough that I actually put off photography mode the thing until it lasts. I took a picture of the costumes hanging on the walls, upright angles, downward, sides, just to show an entire row of frozen, putrid cartoon faces, with some plastic eyes missing. Then I decided to stage a shot, just one of the bedraggled character heads on the slick, grimy floor. I reached for the headpiece of a Donald Duck costume and carefully removed it so the thing wouldn't fall apart in my hands. When I looked into the face of the wide-eyed, moldering head of the duck, a loud clattering sound made me jump with fright. I looked at my feet, and there, between my shoes, was a human skull. It had fallen out of the mascot head, shattered into pieces at my feet. Only a few inches in the lower jaw remained staring at me. I dropped the duck head immediately, as you would expect, and moved for the door. As I stood to the doorway, I looked back to the skull on the floor. I had to take a picture of it, I had to, for any number of reasons that may seem silly, but only if you don't think it through. I need proof of what was going on, especially if Disney was somehow going to make this go away. I had no doubt in my mind right from the start. And it was, even if it was a gross negligence, Disney was responsible for this. That's when the Mickey Mouse, the faux negative opposite Mickey Mouse in the middle of the floor, started to get up. First sitting up, then climbing to its feet. The Mickey Mouse costume, or whoever was inside it, just stood there in the center of the room. Its fake face just staring directly at me as it mumbled no over and over and over and over. With shaking hands and violent thrashing heart and legs that had once again turned to jelly, I managed to lift the camera and aim it right at the opposite creature now quietly sizing me up. The digital camera screen displayed only dead pixels in the shape of the thing. It was a perfect silhouette of the Mickey costume as the camera moved in my unsteady hands. The dead pixels spread, marring the screen to wherever his outline moved to. And then the camera died, just went blank and quiet and broken. I raised my eyes once again to the Mickey costume. "Hey," it said in a hushed, creepy but perfectly executed Mickey Mouse voice. "Want to see my head come off?" It started to pull at its head, working its clumsy, glove-clad fingers around the neck with clawing impatient movements similar to a wounded man trying to pull himself free of a predator's jaws. As it worked its digits into the neck, so much blood came out. So much thick, chunky, yellow blood. I turned around as I heard the sickening tearing of the clothing and flesh, only to about getting away as soon as possible. And above the doorway out of this room, I saw the final messages clawed into the bone. Well, clawed into the metal with bone or fingernails. Abandoned by God. I never got the pictures out of my camera. I never wrote the blog entry about it. And after I ran from that place, fled for my sanity, not if my very life, I knew Disney didn't want to hurt anyone or let anyone know about the place. They didn't want anyone like me getting in, and they didn't want anything like that Mickey Mouse getting out. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was Abandoned by Disney which was created by Slimebeast. Now, cliches aside, this was a really interesting creepypasta. It was a bit lengthy, but it definitely gets the 4.5 out of 5-star ranking due to how it leads a very interesting fact of how Disney would cover something up like this. Like, it's not usually like abnormal for a company to plan doing these like, you know, amusement park arrivals, but then scrap them for certain reasons. Because that's technically how things happen in some, you know, carnivals, or it also happens in movies. Like, sometimes you have to, like, people plan things out and then it gets some concept. Sometimes it gets built, put on trial, but then it suddenly gets shelved due to some unknown reason. I mean, if you look at Action Park, like the Action Park, you know, amusement park place, like that place, Action Park had so much controversy, like, to some of its rides, like the like, let's say the wave pool, like, or like, let's say the, you know, loop-de-loop thing, whatever, is like, that amusement park got shut down, I think, unless it's still functioning, but that would just be shocking despite the controversies it had with some of its rides. Now, back to the story. I really like how it has some aspects with the photography and similar to, like, you'd say you're going on the treasure hunt. But the thing is, like, the things I didn't expect are these three things. Number one, the python being like 80 feet long. That would be insanely big. That would be considered like a new species of snake. Like, that would technically, theoretically be called a megaconda. You know, a megaconda, which would be just like a giant anaconda. The second thing is, why would Disney, like, blow $30 million on this place, but then scrap it? Like, I just feel like that's a major, like, waste of money if you think about it when it comes to money standards. And the final thing I'd like to nitpick about this is, how does a Mickey Mouse costume, faux negative, get up and then speak and then take its head out? Like, take its head off and then shoots out, like, yellow blood. That does not make sense, because theorize this. If it's a inverted, like, Mickey Mouse, right? And blood in regular blood is red, right? Like, a dark red, you know, crimson. If you're to, like, let's say, photo negative, like, regular red blood, right? You get like a bluish blood, right? Because if you photo negative the color red, you get, like, let's say, a lightish blue. So it would have made more sense to say, like, the Mickey Mouse costume took off its head and light blue blood came out, but then it would also kind of make a bit of an excuse saying that the light blue blood would also represent, like, cartoony water, which would make legitimate sense. So I guess that's why the blood was yellow and not blue, because if it was blue, it would have resembled water. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this creepypasta reading of Abandoned by Disney. I've heard that there's actually 2 sequels of this, which is Room Zero and Return to Treasure Island, I think. No, it's taped to Discovery Island. I don't know. I'll probably look them up. But yeah, Room Zero is probably going to be another one I'm going to read. It'll be coming out soon, so yeah. Feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe. Yeah, if you like creepypastas, then this is something that'll perk your interest. So yeah, this is Jeffrey Sembersky, and I am out.